We left off last week with a discussion about Tantric Buddhism and Milarepa, who is perhaps Tibet's most famous saint. This burst, to the disappointment of some, continues with the history of Tibet, but one that demonstrates the importance of Tantra to it. To refresh your memory, Tibet is in an age of fragmentation. Although Longdharma is dead, his deeds have been done. The empire collapsed. Monastic Buddhism no longer has state patronage. As a result, several kingdoms emerge, and Buddhism is left to the hands of yogis, most of whom were not celibate. Because of a lack of cohesion, many teachings of the Dharma spread, but these teachings are localized, even individualized. As a reflection of this period, there's even a saying in Tibetan today that could be translated something like, every valley has its own language, every lama has his own religion. Remember, Milarepa specifically sought to learn from Marpa. Not everyone was happy with this new arrangement, and many detested the, let's say, unorthodox methods of tantric yogis. The most outspoken, perhaps, was Lama Yeshe, who ruled Gulga in western Tibet, one of the many kingdoms that emerged during the era of fragmentation. According to Tibetan narrations of history, Yeshe helped to single-handedly return Buddhism to the monastery by inviting monks from India, building temples, translating texts, and penning strongly worded letters. No, really. Yeshe, whom you can see featured in a mural with Atisha, issued an ordinance condemning tantric practitioners, though he lived before Milarepa. Yeshe is essentially throwing shade at these religious people. The entire text is included in sources of Tibetan tradition. Read it, it's entertaining. Here are some of the more mild highlights. Village abbots, your tantric ways of practicing will shock if the people of other countries hear of it. These practices of you who say we are Buddhists show less compassion than a demon of action. What a strange Buddhist adhering to such practices. If these practices like yours bring about Buddhahood, hunters, fishermen, butchers, and prostitutes, all of these would certainly have attained enlightenment by now. Yeshe was able to snag one of India's most respected Buddhist scholars. Atisha remained in Tibet for 12 years until his death, where he began teaching at various monasteries. People flocked to his teachings. In other words, there is a demand for highly regarded Buddhist teachings. In fact, his reputation grew so large and so quickly, rulers from other kingdoms essentially entered in a bidding war to try to lure Atisha to other monasteries. After a week's vacation from our burst favorite slides, I've thrown one in unexpectedly here. Why does this discussion about Yeshe and Atisha matter? Any clue? Atisha's success marked a turn, gradual but profound, in Buddhism in Tibet. Other rulers saw how Yeshe became even more respected by his subjects after inviting Atisha, so other rulers tried to replicate this business model. Yes, it was kind of a business model. So rulers from various fragmented kingdoms began inviting Indian Buddhist scholars in earnest to strengthen their own reputations and increase the prestige of local monasteries. And once secular rule combines with religion, what happens? Think about the economic benefits. But soon enough, the various Tibetan chieftains would have even more pressing concerns. These concerns came from the north and in the form of a Mongol conquest that, when the dust settled, would rule much of Asia and parts of Europe. Tibet was already suffering from a lack of central power and could do little to resist. Their only hope was to be spared. We could teach an entire course on the Mongol conquest. I know because I had to teach it when I was a graduate student at Indiana University. It isn't that interesting. Don't tell any of my former advisors that. So, for the sake of this class, it is only vital to know that 1. The Mongolian Empire was started by Genghis Khan. Notice I didn't pronounce his name Genghis. It's not Genghis, it's Genghis. It became so large, the empire was administered by Genghis's sons and grandsons. Genghis's grandson Kublai emerged as the ruler of the Great Khan, a vast region that included present-day Mongolia, Korea, parts of the People's Republic of China, including Tibet, but other parts were administered by the Chagatai Khanate, and Vietnam. Golden Khan, who was the son of Ugde and grandson of Genghis, became very interested in Buddhism. In fact, he had somewhat of a spiritual awakening after a great lama of the Buddhist Sakya order, who was named Sakya Pandita, cured Goldan of an illness. Goldan then became Sakya Pandita's disciple, and in return for receiving teachings and a cure for his illness, Goldan essentially hands over day-to-day control of Tibet to the highest-ranking lama of the Sakya school of Buddhism. The relationship between Goldan and Sakya Pandita becomes known as the priest-patron relationship. The arrangement of this relationship was as such. The spiritual guide, or the priest or lama, provides the Mongol ruler with all of his religious needs. Remember the types of powers religious leaders of Tantric Buddhism possessed, especially those empowerment initiations, and they were even seen as Buddhas in the flesh. In return for these teachings, the Mongol leader, or the patron in this relationship, provides authority and military power if needed to ensure the priest's secular agenda is carried out. This relationship continues with Goldan's nephew Kublai and Sakya Pandita's nephew Pagpa. Oh no, I didn't. 2, why does it matter if 1 burst? Are heads exploding? Any fist pumps? Remember, I'm an anthropologist who does research about 21st century issues. I'm not a historian, and sometimes find historical context dull, but it's important. The priest-patron relationship forged between Goldan and Sakya Pandita in the 13th century has become an arguing point for each side of the Tibet is part of China or Tibet is an independent country debate. Here's how. On the Tibetan side of the argument, they will say that the Mongol Khans converted to Buddhism, and not just any form of Buddhism, but specifically Tibetan-style Buddhism. Therefore, by entering a relationship with Tibetan Buddhist clergy, they are actually excluding and rejecting Chinese interpretations of the religion. And remember, especially at that time, the ultimate source of power was often spiritual. And this spiritual power was bestowed upon secular rulers by religious clergy. So similar to the Chinese mandate of heaven, or in Europe, the divine right of kings. Unsurprisingly, the Chinese Communist Party interprets the same episode in history quite differently. They will say Tibetan priests were clearly subjects of the Mongol Empire. Well, they'll say the Yuan dynasty, not the Mongol Empire, but of course of which Kublai was the emperor. And to a certain degree, they're correct. In other words, Sakya Pandita and Pagpa probably had little choice but to enter this priest-patron relationship with the Mongol Khans. Otherwise, Tibet would have likely been annihilated. The Chinese Communist Party will also say Tibet was under direct control of the Yuan. But we have to remember 2 things with this interpretation of history. 1, the Yuan was just one part of 4 large hordes or sections of the Mongol Empire. The second inconvenient fact here is that Guess who else was subject to the Mongols? Chinese. In any case, the Chinese Communist Party points specifically to this priest-patron relationship as an indicator that Tibet and China are inseparable. Okay, that was a lot. I bet you're spent and maybe a little confused. So let's stop here. We will pick up with Pogpa's elucidation of the knowable in the next burst.